Good.
Yep.
All right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning, and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, May the 13th, 2021, at approximately 7:05 p.m. We have a quorum of members both present in Village Hall as well as online with us in a hybrid model. And at this time, I'll ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Brian Simmons, to please call the roll.
Corey,
Here.
O'Loughlin, Graziano,
Here.
Jasper,
Here.
Kretschmer,
Here.
Williams,
Here.
Nats,
Here.
Stefani. Here.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to rise with us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks very much, everyone. So before we begin our meeting, I think most of you are aware that we've had a few changes here on the ZPA committee. Two of our members were recently elected to village trustees, and so we've had two new members join us, Mr. Chris Nats and Mr. Anthony Stefani. So gentlemen, formally welcome to the ZPA. Thank you for stepping up and stepping forward. We personally appreciate it.
Thank you.
And maybe, thank you. And maybe what we can do, we'll begin with Mr. Nats, and maybe you could just give a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Stefani.
Sure. Yep, Chris Nats, Cary resident for about nearly 21 years. My pleasure to be here this evening. Background in development and new housing industry, and just hope to be able to apply some of my skill set to the function here. And
Welcome.
thank you.
Mr. Stefani?
Yep, Anthony Stefani. Gosh, been here for about 2.5 years, but born and raised, left, and finally came back. So 2 kids, wife, was a teacher, kids going through 26 right now. Happy to be here, and yeah, here to help. So.
Well, we're happy to have you both, and congratulations to you both. Well done.
Thank you.
And gentlemen, as we've talked about in the interview process, one of the things I want you to know from meeting you is that we're not just going to throw you in the deep end. We'll assign mentors, as we've discussed in the past. There are some training videos that are available to you. I know they're not all working correctly. And there's also some education opportunities through the American Planners Association, which Mr. Simmons helps us with from time to time. And you probably just heard the mayor that he said he'll come back and give us an overview of kind of what's going on from a Village of Cary perspective in the not too distant future. So stay tuned for that. But again, congratulations. And if there's anything that I can do to assist during the transition, feel free. You have my information. Happy to help in every way I can. But welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Okay. So, gentlemen, before I move on to the next issue, any questions for the new members?
I don't know. Tony looks familiar to me for some reason. I don't know why, but
We'll figure it out.
All right. So before we get to the first petition, we just have an administrative item that we need to go through. And the chair is going to ask all the members if they've received their packets via law enforcement and also electronically, so that before I ask for the approval of the meeting minutes, that you're all in possession of them.
yes.
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 All right. So the chair, by general consent, I'm going to do these in order that they're on the agenda. I'm going to ask for general consent on the all 4K cuts and colors for the map amendment and parking violation. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the second meeting minutes is for the Village of Cary and the conditional use for the electronic message center. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, gentlemen. So at this time, I'm going to call village case number 21-ZPA-04001. And for the petitioner, I know this may be a little bit new for you, the way we do this. Mr. Simmons, whom I think you know, is going to give us an overview of your request. And then members of the ZPA may have questions for Mr. Simmons. And then upon conclusion, if you want to add any additional comments or color, we'll ask you to do so. Just come up to the microphone, state your name and address, and then we'll go from there. Again, members of the ZPA committee may have questions for yourself. Once we close that portion of the meeting, we open it up to the public. You can see we don't have a lot of people besides yourself in the village hall, but we are online. And there's possibility there may be some questions online, but I don't know that for a fact at the moment. Then we close that portion of the meeting. Members may have some questions amongst themselves regarding the petition. We take a vote, and then that vote gets delivered back to our elected officials, and they would become the final decision maker on the request tonight. So that's our process. So before we turn it over to Mr. Simmons, any questions about the process? No? Good. All right, Mr. Simmons, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request this evening is for the property at 675 Industrial Drive. The petitioner is seeking approval of a conditional use to allow for vehicle sales at the facilities. They're looking to operate a used car dealership that would be primarily online operations. Technology here. Background on the request, the property is zoned M Limited Manufacturing. Again, the approvals they're requesting this evening is just a conditional use to allow for vehicle sales from the property. The site was originally annexed into the village in the late 70s, 1978, and the existing building was constructed on that facility, or in that property back in 1989. Since that time period, it's had various uses that have been zoned appropriately for the district. So there's been no zoning entitlement process for other uses in the building other than office warehouse type uses. The zoning district does allow for the sale of vehicles as a conditional use, which is why the petitioner is seeking approval this evening for their proposed operation. As proposed, the petitioner is seeking to do internet-based sales with very limited walk-ins in the facility. All of the vehicles are planned to be stored inside that would be available for sale in the warehouse portion of the building. At the beginning of operations, the petitioner is thinking that they'll have approximately 20 to 30 vehicles that will be available for sale. That may expand over time if the business does well. Proposed hours of operation would be Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., with likely a total of 2 employees working on site. And then the only operation that would be taking place here would be the physical sale and storage of the vehicles. Any maintenance that would need to be performed on any vehicles will be outsourced to a third party and done offsite at another location. Staff reviewed the proposal based off the parking requirements for uses. As the zoning board is aware, the zoning ordinance or Unified Development Ordinance breaks down parking requirements based off use groups or use types. So depending on the type of use, there's different parking requirements, parking spaces that are required for that use. The eastern portion or western portion of the building is currently occupied by DoD Technologies, a light manufacturing use. They then, based off the square footage of their space, are required to have a certain number of spaces that would provide parking for their use, which would be the 41 spaces. The staff reviewed the proposal, both looking at it as a storage facility and also as a used or as a car dealership within our code. Then both regulations kind of dictated how many spaces would be required for the use. Staff felt that the storage facility use requirements would be more applicable in this case, as the vehicles that would be offered for sale will not be stored outside, but would be stored specifically within the building. And therefore, based off the square footage of the proposed use, would require a total of 22 spaces for employees and customers to utilize the building. In total, then with both the uses on the property, a total of 63 spaces would be required, with a total of 71 being provided. When we looked at the requirements for vehicle sales, specifically, I think the requirement within the staff report was around 140 vehicles would be required, or 130 spaces would be required. And if we broke down the warehouse portion of the building and maximize the number of vehicles that could go in there, that would be fairly equal to that requirement. So staff felt that this application of the code was appropriate for this building and the proposed use located here, with storage primarily being inside the building. As with any petition that comes before the zoning board has the requirements to review based off the standards within the Unified Development Ordinance for the specific request. In this case, the conditional use standards would apply, which are summarized in the slide. Specifically, the use would not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, or comfort. General welfare of the public, will not substantially diminish or impair the value of properties within the immediate vicinity, not impede the normal orderly development of surrounding area, and also be consistent with the policies of the future land use maps. Petitioner did provide a response to the standards, which is in the packet of information. But in addition, with the sales being predominantly performed online with storage inside, the use of the property will not overwhelmingly change from what it is as of today. So staff believes that, in its opinion, the standards may be met in this case. And should the zoning board agree with that condition, determine that the various standards have been met in this case, is recommended that the ZPA this evening recommend approval of conditional use for vehicle sales and rental for a used car dealership for the property located at 675 Industrial Drive, subject to the conditions that are listed in the staff report. I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have, and the petitioner is here to provide additional information on the request as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. Gentlemen, questions for Mr. Simmons?
So it's an online car sale, so it's really not that many people coming in shopping that way?
Correct. Yeah. From discussions with the petitioner, approximately 1% to 2% of the sales might be people that would come into the facility. The predominance of it would be online sales operation.
So it's almost like a warehouse holding the cars inside.
Correct. And that's how we staff looked at it from a storage perspective, is that the vehicles would be stored inside. The overall appearance of the building is not going to change with the operation.
Don't we have a similar operation of this on the other end of town, over on Detroit Street or in that area?
I remember that, Jim.
And never had any problem with it, but
Correct.
I can. Okay.
Yeah, there are other uses that are in the village. The one that's on, I believe there's one that's actually on Jandis Road that does restoration and sells vehicles.
That's the same area.
Yeah, same area. But yes, it's not a new use to the village. It's just the zoning classification, the zoning district does require the conditional use approval for them to be able to sell vehicles in that location.
Gentlemen, questions for Mr. Simmons? Mr. Jasper or Mr. Williams?
None from me, thank you. None from me, Patrick.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So, Mr. Simmons, I just have one, and I'll ask the petitioner the same. Obviously, there was a number of businesses notified in and around the area of the petitioner. Did you receive any information at all from anyone, one way or the other?
Nobody reached out to the village. So.
Thank you very much. All right, so gentlemen, I'm not sure who's going to represent petitioner, but you're welcome to add any additional comments or color around the request. And if you do want to do that, simply ask that you state your name and address for the record. Be aware that we do record the proceedings so that people can go back and look at them at a future date and time. It's on YouTube, in case you're wondering.
I don't think I need to add anything, but if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask me any questions. I've been in the business for 18 years. So.
Okay, maybe just so everybody can hear, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, would you state your name and address, please?
First name is Philip, last name is DeVero. Address is 446 Meadows Edge Lane, Lisle, Illinois.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
So gentlemen, the petitioner is at the podium. Any questions for the petitioner?
No.
How exotic are your vehicles?
Pretty excited. I would have taken some here today, but unfortunately I can't fit in them. Mike's probably the only one I could fit in. Me and Mike tried to get in one of the Vipers today and we just gave up. We're like, okay, let's take the pickup truck. But you guys are all more welcome to come check it out when we open.
Well, I'll segue a little bit onto Mr. Graciano's comment. So when you say exotic, I'm thinking about security for yourselves. I know you have a lot of equipment there, but if you had a Bugatti in there and someone was aware of that, that's obviously very expensive.
It's a very expensive car.
So are you folks concerned around security at all? I assume you have cameras and that sort
We
of
have
thing?
cameras. It's a pretty good locked up facility and stuff like that. But yes, cameras. We have trackers on all the vehicles and stuff like that. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a big deal right now with the Jeeps. They're having a big problem with the Jeeps and Chrysler with that taking them out. So kind of went ahead and you put a tracker in the system. Even though they have their own tracking device, it's good to just add a little peace of mind for an extra $40. put a tracker in, you can actually check it right on your phone and stuff like that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So gentlemen, questions again for the petitioner?
Just out of curiosity, cars that are coming to you guys, are they single or are they actually coming on transport?
Transport, sometimes I do pick them up, or I pick them up myself. I do have an enclosed trailer, so I do a lot of the transport myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I happen to drive by your location from time to time because that's on my way home, and I noticed I think you do some events around exotic automobiles.
Yeah, we did an event, when did we do it? 2 years ago?
Oh, we had
When did you guys do it?
during the year.
Yeah, maybe 2 years ago, we did an event. We do a lot of events for, we do like car cruises for different, we do a lot of stuff for Cal's Angels.
Yes.
So we actually do, there's an event Thursday we go to, so we're actually starting off in Chicago to Indy to Kentucky and then North Carolina.
Wow.
So all the benefits either go to state police. So if you see some of our cars sometimes have state police plates on them.
Yes.
So a lot of the donations go there and to Cal's Angel. We kind of split it up.
Very good.
And unfortunately, sometimes I do cut my hair for money too.
All right. So where I was going with that, and I really admire and appreciate what you do there, is that when you do your events, do you anticipate kind of an overload on your parking? No.
We kind of foresee all that stuff beforehand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question for yourselves is that I mentioned to Mr. Simmons that obviously part of the process, you have to notify your business neighbors. And did you personally receive?
I personally did all that, yeah. I think there was 36 or 38 that envelopes I had to mail out. Yes, I did it personally.
And did you get any response out?
I didn't get any response.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's my questions, but let me just double check with the members to see if there's any additional questions or online from Mr. Jasper or Mr. Williams.
None from me, thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. So at this time, I'm going to open up the floor to public comment, and I'm double checking with Mr. Simmons to see if there's anybody online.
Nobody online.
Okay, and gentlemen, unless you have public comment to offer around this, if you do, you're welcome to comment. Or if not, I'll close the public portion of the meeting. And gentlemen, before I call the motion, any other comments or questions around the request? No. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a conditional use for motor vehicle sales and rental for a used car dealership for the property located at 675 Industrial Drive, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second?
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Would you please call the roll, Mr.
Sure.
Simmons?
Graziano?
Yes.
Jasper?
Yes.
Kretschmer?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Nats?
Yes.
Stefani?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes. So we have a favorable recommendation, gentlemen, and the way the process works now, just stay in touch with Mr. Simmons, and he'll be able to put you in touch with the next meeting. This should go on something called the consent agenda, because it was favorably approved here unanimously. And barring some kind of calamity, I think you'll be good to go after the next village board meeting. So we'll wish you continued success.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to seeing what you're offering over there. And that's,
You guys are more than welcome to come in.
thank you. May take you up on that.
Good luck.
As long as you drive snake, you guys are more than welcome to drive.
Good luck.
And you can fit it. And you can fit it.
Well, thank you and good luck.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yep. And June 1st will be the date for the village board meeting, is what we're looking at. June 1st, so.
So gentlemen, the next piece of business we have is actually from the village of Cary. And Mr. Simmons is going to give us an overview of village case number 21, ZPA 04002. There are 3 requests that are going to be made around the UDO. One is Chapter 4, Development Standards. 2 is going to be Chapter 7, Plan Development Ordinances. And then Chapter 10, Administrative Provisions. And so over to you, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so the request this evening is just a few minor updates to the Unified Development Ordinance. As the older board members will recall, we went through the process a few years ago and updated our development regulations and created the Unified Development Ordinance. And from time to time, we will go through and review those codes to see how they were acting and make modifications to them to better reflect the type of development or requests that we're seeing. And some of these are more housekeeping items, but I'll go through in a little bit more detail as far as what some of the changes are, but more than happy to discuss them further if there's questions as well. The majority of the changes are to the Chapter 4, the development standards. A few areas that we're proposing to make modifications are within the accessory structure portion of the code, just adding some additional types of structures, such as gazebos, which we've had requests for, and different types of structures that individuals are looking to construct on their property, which the code, we typically applied the shed requirements to them. But I think but the type of requests that we were having, it made sense to establish standards or define those types of structures, and then also clarified where those types of structures can be placed in the property and clearly defining the overall height for those structures. Another change that we are proposing is to limit the number of any single type of structure proposed on a property to one. Previously, the code only limited, established a maximum for detached garages and sheds. In this case, with this new wording that's proposed, there's established a minimum for any type of structure you want to construct. So if it's a pool, a shed, detached garage, gazebo, there's a limit that you can have one of that, a specific type of that, but you can have one of each. So if you want to have a pool in your backyard, if you want to have a shed, and have space for a detached garage, as long as it meets the other requirements in the code, you can have up to one of each of those structures. And then clearly defining what the overall height is for those structures. In the UDO update, the change that was proposed or that was approved established a maximum height for any accessory structure to be the same height as the primary structure, not larger than a primary structure. And what we observed in a few instances were individuals that wanted to construct a detached garage and had a two-story home. They could do a two-story garage, which would be a very substantial accessory structure. So we reestablishing the old requirement of a maximum height of 15 feet to the midpoint of the roof for those types of structures, and then sheds as well at the same height that was previously proposed, but would still allow for some flexibility in the code from that perspective. In the landscape provisions of the code, what's here is more to provide additional definition for the types of plant materials that can be utilized in the landscape plan. Throughout the ordinance, there are references to ornamental trees, and we do have requirements within our recommended plant listing for those types of trees, which are more decorative trees, that are more flowering, lower type canopies. In the definition of within the ordinance, those trees were not defined specifically as far as what the recommended height or size would be at installation. So we're just recommending to add that language to provide more direction towards developers of commercial property as far as what type of trees those would be allowed in, and more direction in that regards. Likewise with drive-throughs, the language that was approved in the UDO required a small landscape fence or wall along any drive-through lane. And I think the intent of that requirement was to provide screening of a drive-through if it was adjacent to a less intensive land use, as opposed to most of the drive-throughs that are in the village right now are within commercial districts, and we don't have landscape walls or fences that screen those areas. So we still would require landscaping if the drive-through is next to another commercial property to try and screen or buffer the requirement. But if it's next to a residential zone property, then the fence wall requirement would come in. So it's a slightly modifying the code requirement to be less restrictive as what was adopted as, but I think it's more reflective of the type of development we've had in the village historically, and it would still meet the intent and purpose of what we're looking for from screening those types of land uses. The other provisions for off-street parking and loading, I do have some additional slides I'll go through. Just didn't want to get there yet. The dimensional table for the parking modules. Staff, as we were administering the code, realized that the table did not line up correctly with the figure that was adopted within the code, and that's within section 14.465. So to keep the existing image that we approved, we've changed the table to accurately reflect what the dimensions of a parking lot should be. In some cases, the module for what was previously adopted, the drive aisle dimension was not accurately reflected to the table if you compare the two images back against each other. So that is more of a clarification just to correctly illustrate how we want to regulate the development of parking lots in the village. Other changes to that section are for driveways, and this is specifically in relation to how we've seen permit applications come in since we've adopted the code. Previously, the maximum width for a driveway in our old zoning ordinance was 26 feet. And then when we adopted the code, the maximum width that was referenced in the code was a maximum of the garage width. So if you had a one-car garage, how the code was written when we adopted in the UDO, if it was only a 12-foot wide garage door, you can only have a 12-foot wide driveway. So anything beyond that would require variance, where previously we allowed up to 26 feet for a total width if you could have an extra parking pad area. Likewise, with the two-car garage, you'd be limited to the 12 or 16 feet, whatever the width of the garage was from that perspective. So these changes that are in this section that are proposed are to try to move back to what the old code requirements were, allowing for a driveway to be no wider than the width of the garage or 26 feet, whichever is greater. So there is some flexibility in there that somebody still that could go up to 26 feet. But if they had a three-car garage and needed the width wider than 26 feet, they can go up to that overall dimension as well. So just a few examples of what that looks like currently in the community. The image on the left on the screen right now shows what the code requirement would be at the property line. Is we require driveways to be narrowed down to a maximum width of 20 feet in the right-of-way, which is consistent with what it was prior to the UDO. But with the first image on the left, that's a three-car garage existing in the community. It's over 26 feet in width, but they are allowed to go that wide because that's the width of the three-car garages to access the structure. Likewise, the second image here, the house has a two-car garage, and as you can see, they have a parking pad that's on the right side of the garage. So they would be able to widen the driveway to access both the two-car garage and then also the parking pad that's on the side of the facility, as there's other code requirements for the placement of parking pads within the code. The third image looks at driveways that have parallel paving strips on either side of them. Sometimes they're pavers, sometimes they're concrete, and as you notice, if people have a paved area, they will occasion to park on that area. So the code proposes to incorporate those paving strips, allow them. So if you want to have decorative elements on a driveway, you can do so, but that gets incorporated into the overall width of the driveway. In this particular image, I don't think the driveway is more than 20 feet in width, but the maximum you can have in the right-of-way would be the 20 feet, and on the property would be up to the 26 feet in width. But it allows for the two types of pavement where some people widen out the driveway with a paver parking pad to allow for the storage of vehicles in the front of their property. Other modifications that are proposed are to clearly define where on the property that the driveway widening can occur, so that intentionally the driveway width is proposed more towards the side yard of a property or the side of the garage, and not to dominate the front of the home. So as a proposal is to maximize how much of an encroachment one can have from a driveway towards the front of the structure. So limit the 3-foot projection Some of these images are of driveways that are outside of town, so it's not a situation that occurs extensively in the community. But you would have the maximum width, the property line of 20 feet, and then where the garage area would be on the home would be able to project towards the front of the house or the front door access to the house another 3 feet. And then the rest of the width would have to go to the other direction towards the side yard. Image 2 shows the same image with a parallel sidewalk or paving strip. Since that's directly abutting the sidewalk, that would count towards the 26 feet in width. But if there was landscape separation between the two of a foot or more, then that paving area would not count towards the maximum width of the driveway. Any questions on those proposed modifications or images?
Any questions for Mr. Simmons?
So the image that you're showing on the far right, the red dotted line is what you're recommending, the 3 foot maximum, because this one obviously shows it going farther, but you're saying it would
Correct.
end at the red dotted line under the proposed.
Correct. Yeah, so the clearly defined, so in this case, the driveway, there's a paving pad that's wider on the right side of the driveway as you're leading up to the house. They also have a paving pad on the left side of the driveway as well. And in this particular property, they probably could store 5 vehicles in front of the home just by how it was constructed. So the overall intent would be to limit how far with the garage located in this portion here, limit how far in front of the house that driveway can extend over, so you wouldn't have a 26-foot wide paved area in the front of the home that it would force more of the parking towards the side of the structure.
Thank you.
Mr. Simmons, I have a question around the same idea, that if someone was building a new home and there was a 3-car garage, and the 3-car garage was in excess of 26 feet, would that require the new home builder to get the variance?
No. So the way the language is proposed, so the first image here shows the 3-car garage. So the way the language is proposed would be the driveway shall be no wider than the width of the garage. So if it's a 3-car garage, they would be able to widen up the garage or 26 feet, whichever is greater. So if it's a 2-car garage, they can go up to 26 feet. But if a 3-car garage is wider than that 26 feet, they could widen it out to the width of the 3-car garage. But in all those instances would have to narrow it down to the 20 feet as you get to the property line. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question.
And that's historically accurate with how driveways have been performed in the newer subdivisions that have 3-car garages. Homes, that the width of the driveway, serves all 3 garages and then narrows as you get down to the right of way.
I do have one more question. You can extend the driveway, let's say you're adding a pad to the side of the driveway, like in image number 2. How close can you come to the side yard lot line?
In our code now allows the setback of 1 foot.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's the driveway width, like in this image, if the parking pad, which kind of extends beyond the front line of the house, is how we define a parking pad. If it's a driveway, that can be 1 foot off the property line. But parking pads, the way we've looked at those, there's a storage pad if it's for a boat or some other recreational vehicle. There's other requirements in the code for screening of those areas. And for the parking pads, we required, or storage pad, meet the accessory structure setback of 5 feet. Is how we've been trying to administer that. So the code would allow you to widen it out if your home is set back a certain distance, but to try to maintain some buffer with an adjacent use as much as possible in that case. But if it's a driveway leading up to the property, we've allowed those up to 1 foot off the property.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, any other questions for Mr. Simmons?
Two other tweaks that we're proposing in the code, just as we're updating the development standards section. There are a few minor tweaks we're proposing elsewhere in the code just to clarify some regulations that we've had for the plan development ordinance. We've had a few petitions that have come through at the zoning board, or not the zoning board, the village board level, As we're discussing some waiver of requirements of the applications, there's been some lengthy discussion as far as the environmental impact studies that are required and what, when it's required and what is actually involved in that. So the proposed language change here is just to provide clarity as far as when that's necessary for a project and then what type of reports need to be provided for that. Specifically, for a larger development or a development that's proposed that's going through the plan development ordinances, to clearly provide a report or summary of what the environmental conditions are of the property or sensitivity of the property, and then if there's been any phase 1 or phase 2 studies that have been done for the EPA, that those be provided as part of the petition as well, so those can be considered for any potential impacts to surrounding properties. The other change that's proposed in Chapter 10 for administrative provisions is just to modify the code slightly, the language in the code that will allow staff more tools or flexibility in obtaining compliance for zoning violations. The way it's drafted now, it speaks more towards the performance standards, which are specific to industrial land uses. So if we have a property currently that is not complying with their sign ordinance, put up a sign on their own, and didn't get a proper permit, that section of the code couldn't be utilized to gain compliance. But with the proposed language modifications, it will be more applicable to other types of situations, would allow us to be able to suspend somebody's certificate of occupancy for a business or other remedies that we could have to obtain compliance if we needed to. Most of the time, properties do comply, but we have had some issues where it's been difficult to gain compliance for other matters, and this would assist with giving us other tools to achieve those end objectives. So that's a summary of the text amendments that are proposed. As with any request that comes before the ZPA, there are various standards in the code that need to be met to comply or to approve the consideration. Essentially, the amendment is not detrimental to the development of the village. It's not detrimental to or endanger the public health, and that the amendment promotes public interest and not solely the interest of the applicant. As these regulations proposed would apply to the entire village and development in the village. They don't represent the village's interest, but there's further reflect the type of development that the village wants to see, or the type of reinvestment that the village wants to see homeowners be able to make in their properties. So with that, should the ZPA determine the various standards have been met, it's recommended that the ZPA make a recommendation of approval of the proposed changes to the Unified Development Ordinance. Oops. Realized I made an error in that. Used an old presentation. If you recommend approval of the text amendments to the village board, we'll pursue those changes.
So we can strike the
Yeah, you can strike the cannabis portion. I didn't catch all the modifications I need to do to it. So.
We won't read into that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. That was another change that we made, which I used that presentation as a basis for this one. But
So, gentlemen, before I open up to the public, questions for Mr. Simmons on the request?
No, I'll just make a statement. When I first started going through this, and obviously I read it word for word, I was getting all excited with the landscape requirements. I said, we can't dictate, ornamental trees and all this. Then I went back and read that it didn't apply to the residential. So.
yeah, it predominantly applies to commercial and industrial property development. So a single-family home residential would we wouldn't dictate what that landscaping impact.
All right, so at this time, I will open up the floor to the public, and for the record, there's no one assembled anymore here in Village Hall, but I'm double checking with Mr. Simmons to see if there's anyone online.
Nobody online.
All right, so at that point, we'll close the public comment section. And gentlemen, unless you have any other questions for Mr. Simmons, I'm going to call the motion. Chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a text amendment to Chapter 4, Development Standards, Chapter 7, Plan Development Ordinance, and Chapter 10, Administrative Provisions of the Village of Cary Unified Development Ordinance.
So move.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Simmons, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Jasper,
Yes.
Kretschmer,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Nats,
Yes.
Stefani,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. So, Mr. Simmons, I think you know well what to do with this approval.
I do, yes. I will not attend the meeting, but yes.
All right. And gentlemen, before we adjourn, there's a couple of housekeeping issues that I just wanted to make you aware of, and this relates to Mr. Jasper and to Mr. Williams. We're circulating here in Village Hall a contact sheet, and I had the occasion recently that I was trying to reach out to one of the members only to find out that we had the wrong email address on file. So I know we've made some corrections to the document here. So to Mr. Jasper and to Mr. Williams, we'll probably send this document out electronically, and if you could double check it, just to make sure that we have the correct contact information, that'll be appreciated. And we'll have to follow up with Mr. O'Loughlin personally around the same issue. So maybe we can do that electronically.
Yeah, I'll email this out tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And gentlemen, one
My
of
information hasn't changed in 30 years. But I'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
appreciate it, Mr. Jasper. And the other comment I was going to offer you, gentlemen, I don't know who looks at their payroll summaries with any regularity, but what I learned recently is that you might recall, some of you, that we would get paper checks in the mail indicating you were paid for a meeting, and now the village is doing this electronically. So if you want to know where that information resides, there's a kind of a website you need to subscribe to, and Mr. Simmons can help with that process through the person that handles finance within the village. Company's name is, I think, Lauterbach and Amon.
Mhm.
And you can look at your W-2 for payments and also your regular checks. So I don't know who's interested in that, but if you are interested in that, my suggestion would be to contact Mr. Simmons.
Yep, send me an email, and then I can provide your information to the finance department, and they can get you set up for logging in online to get that documentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons.
Can't remember the last time I got a notice, actual notice in the mail.
Yeah, I think we've been using this system for probably 4 or 5 years, but if you want a copy of it electronically, you can log in and view it online. But
I don't know, all I know is it throws me into a new tax bracket every year.
All right, gentlemen, before we adjourn, is there anything else that you wanted to discuss? I'll ask Mr. Simmons to help us understand when the next meetings might be.
right now, there's not an active petition, so there likely will not be a meeting in June. Probably our next meeting will be in July, I would assume, unless somebody comes in the next week with a petition, but I'm assuming the next meeting will be in July, so have a good July 4th
Okay.
and Memorial Day.
Hey, Brian, just a quick question, and I think Patrick's asked this a few times. Are we seeing less petitions because of the UDO and what we changed, or are you still seeing a lot because, COVID and there's more different ones, or what is your general feel for how this has been going, and will we continue kind of like this?
Yeah, I think from, it's a good question. From the UDO standpoint, we have seen, with the changes within the code and the changes we're proposing tonight, you'll see, we're seeing less petitions coming in for variance and relief based off of the modifications we made to the code. I will say the permit activity that the village has seen since last June has been through the roof, where we had over 200 plus permits that we issued in the month of May this year alone, driver replacements, decks, all types of work. So we have not seen a slowdown in reinvestment in the community, but the type of projects and the modifications we made with the code have reduced the amount of variances that go along with those projects. So I think the intent of the UDO has been felt from that perspective, and I think the changes we made this evening, or proposed this evening for driveways as an example, and the accessory structures will further that as well, will still meet the intent. So that's the type of variances that we've seen have been just more extreme compared to what the code was before.
And so we've maybe moved a bottleneck, not that we had a bottleneck before, but obviously, because I'm just trying to look at public perception, and obviously everybody's trying to, a lot of people are doing work to the outside, inside, whatnot, to their homes. So I feel for the department and trying to get the permits and trying to get those approved. So I guess that's a good thing if we're opening it up and making it more accessible.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the areas that we had within the code previously that required, hearings before this board were solar panels on roofs. And now if you go and just look at an aerial of the village on Google, you can see several that have gone up since the time period that we've adopted the code. So I think we approved 5 or 6 before the code change, and there's considerably more than that in the community today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mr. Williams,
Thanks, Brian.
I appreciate that comment because you recall as we went through the process of reviewing the UDO and creating the UDO, we talked about as a community how we want it to be easier to do business with and simplifying it and hopefully making it easier for residents. And I think that's precisely what's occurred because now we're kind of in a situation where we're doing monthly meetings versus bi-monthly. And from what I'm gathering from Mr. Simmons is that it's making it easier for the citizens of Cary to do business with us, which I think is one of the outcomes we were looking to achieve. So well done to everybody involved in that process. And I think Mr. Simmons can tell you better than I can. He's being avalanched with
Work.
work and comments on a regular basis. And I think that's actually speaks volumes to the UDO. So well done. All right, gentlemen, so unless there's any other questions, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
You got it.
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hi.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Meeting adjourned.
Welcome, Chris and Anthony. Have a great evening, gentlemen.
Thanks, you too.
Well, why